and we'll let you take it away.
Well, good evening and welcome to our event this evening. We are going to be talking to Todd Churches and Helena Escalante about Todd's book, Visual Leadership. We're going to just have the chat feature on and available for you to submit questions and have discussions, all that type of great stuff. So stay tuned. Next slide, please.
Yeah, Todd, you're driving tonight.
I am driving, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So the question that and the theme that we'll be discussing tonight is how to lead yourself and others in this new normal and turn your vision into reality using the principles of visual leadership.
Great.
Again, just a few housekeeping rules. Please interact in the chat. Also use the chat feature for the Q&A section. We're going to be having a 40-minute dialogue between Todd and Helena. We're going to spend the last 20 minutes for the Q&A session. And then if you want more Q&A and virtual networking, please remain after 7 o'clock for another 30 minutes of more Todd and Helena. So Helena Escalante, who is going to be interviewing Todd, is actually an entrepreneur in residence at the New York Public Library's Business Center. She is the international best-selling author of her most recent accomplishment, her book, The Quickest Guide to Content Creation. Helena is a well-renowned copywriter and marketing strategist and the CEO and founder of Introverts. So Helena, welcome, and we look forward to this conversation that we are going to be having with Todd tonight. So welcome.
Elizabeth, thank you so much. I am thrilled to have this program in collaboration with the Ferguson Library and the New York Public Library. I think we have done some wonderful programs in the past, and I'm really looking forward to some new and wonderful programs in the future, such as this one. Welcome, everybody. It's so wonderful to have you here. You are in for a treat today. I don't know how to introduce Todd in the sense that I don't know of all of his accomplishments, what to say first, because they are all so cool. So if you'll excuse me, just to make sure that I don't forget any of them, I am going to take my eyes from the camera for a second just to read to you what he has done so far, because it is fantastic. So he is the CEO and co-founder of Big Blue Gumball, which is a New York City-based consulting firm specializing in leadership development, public speaking, and executive coaching. He is not once, not twice, but a 3-time award-winning adjunct assistant professor of leadership at the NYU School of Professional Studies in the Division of Programs in Business, where he has taught a very popular course called Leadership and Team Building at the graduate level in their Human Capital Management Master's Program. And he's been there for the past 10 years. So that is just an incredible accomplishment. Todd is also a lecturer on leadership in various different graduate programs at Columbia University. And he is also a Tedx speaker, where his talk is called The Power of Visual Thinking. You can find that online, and it's a great talk. So I suggest that you go and check it out. Not now, but after the program. And he is also the author, if this weren't enough, he is also the author of a brand new book, which I've got here with me, called Visual Leadership: Leveraging the Power of Visual Thinking in Leadership and in Life. And this was just published last month, right?
Yes.
By Simon & Schuster, by Post Hill Press, which is an imprint of Simon & Schuster. So Todd, I am absolutely thrilled to thank you, I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here. And I just want to say thank you so much, because we definitely are in for a treat. I've read your book, and I hope that the audience gets a chance to read it too. You can find the book wherever books are sold. And the first question that I have to ask, of course, is why visual leadership? What is visual leadership? If you could explain that, I think that would be great for the audience to get acquainted with that term that you coined.
Sure. Visual leadership is First of all, it's a registered trademark. It took me two years to get the patent, the service mark for visual leadership. The patent office rejected it the first 2 times. The third time they said,
Oh, no.
okay. So that's a lesson there. Be persistent and don't take no for an answer the first time with anything, right? So
good lesson there.
So visual leadership is basically, if you take a look at this Venn diagram, visual leadership is what I say is where visuals and visual thinking and leadership meet, right? Leadership, we could spend all day just talking about leadership, what leadership is. You know, in my book, everyone's a leader in one way or at one time or another, right? So we're not talking about leadership as in you're the VP, you're the president, you're the CEO. We're talking about leadership, acting like a leader, even if you're not working, even if you're just leading your own, if you're a student, if you know, whatever you do, even if you're just leading and managing your own life, you are a leader, right? So if we put that aside, that I'm not a leader because I don't have a title, so everyone's a leader. Visual thinking is basically, I'm not going to give that away yet because I want people to interact with what that's about. So we'll start by saying visual leadership is where the application of visual thinking and visual communication to management and leadership. So that's the abbreviated version, and we'll get into it in more detail as we go along.
Well, and yes, I want to keep the suspense a little bit as to what visual thinking is. But you know, just as a way of interacting with the audience, what do you think it is? So let's not ask Todd. Let's wait just for a second. Tell us in the chat, how would you define visual thinking? What is this for you? And there are no good or bad answers, but just tell us, if you were to say, okay, this is visual thinking, how do you define it? Okay, so Danielle says, thinking out loud using pictures. All right. Bobby says, communicating with images. Cool, thanks, Bobby.
Yeah, take your best guess, even if you don't know. There's no wrong answer.
Carol, thinking in images, conveying images. Diana says, I believe visual thinking is brainstorming. Oh, great, 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 great. Angie says, leading, it's moving fast, by thinking of what will happen in the future. There you go, visualizing your goals, mapping your vision, understanding visual cues and images around us, seeing in your mind. Wow. I have a disability, and to me, I see means I understand. Very, very good point. Seeing something that makes you think beyond just the object, seeing what you want, visualizing your future, putting a story on images. Todd, wow, this is awesome. Understanding things and communicating them with others using graphics.
If this was my class, everyone would get an A. All right answer.
There you go. There you go. Thank you. So everybody gets an A++++.
I'm an easy grader, so no, I'm just kidding. I'm not.
Awesome. No, but this is wonderful. Oh my God, all of these awesome answers. All right, so Todd, I will now turn it back to you so that you can tell us how you define visual thinking.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, it's just as there is no one definition for leadership, there is no one definition for visual thinking, right? So if you think about visual leadership, it's a lot of things to a lot of different people. So what we talk about today is my perception and how I formulate my ideas around visual thinking. So again, if it's visualization, that's great. If it's using pictures, if it's using metaphors, however you use it is totally fine. But we're going to leave here tonight with some new tools, tips, and techniques and ways of thinking about it. So visual thinking in the most basic form is about thinking in pictures. So it's about not only using pictures as in images, as in PowerPoint slides, but drawings, artwork, sculpture could be visual. You can use visual language. Martin Luther King, his I Have a Dream speech is one of the great visual speeches of all time. He didn't say, I have a PowerPoint presentation. He didn't say, I have an Excel spreadsheet, right? Basically, he painted a vision of the future that was different from and better than the current reality, right? So his I Have a Dream speech is the classic visionary speech. Steve Jobs' presentation. So you could think throughout history, who are the people that we think of as visionary leaders? And most often they communicated in visual language that helped us to visualize in our mind's eye, which is the term that Shakespeare coined in Hamlet. We see things in our mind's eye almost as if we're watching a movie, and our visual thinking could be in the past, as in a memory, in the present, as in a thought or something that we imagine, or in the future, a hope, a dream, an aspiration. So visual thinking can take a lot of forms, and we do it all the time, whether we realize it or not.
Todd, you have a very long and very peculiar story of, as to how you came about realizing the importance of visual thinking. Because it seems to me that we just go through life thinking in images, but never really giving them much, much importance, because they're such an integral part of us. But the way you came about realizing their importance, I think, is worth telling. Could you please share your story as to how you came, as to how you first realized the importance of this?
Sure. Well, it wasn't like, a eureka moment necessarily, but it was something that kind of accumulated over time. So most people think and assume, because I'm a management leadership consultant and trainer and executive coach, that I have a business background, but I was not. I was an English literature major with a concentration in Shakespeare and poetry. So like you, we are both bookworms and book nerds. So I was a big reader from a very early age. So Superman and Batman comics and Superman and Batman TV shows. So a big part of my thought process, like a lot of us growing up, is thinking in story, right? Thinking in terms of story, thinking in terms of characters. Stories have a beginning, middle, and end. In stories, there are victims, villains, and heroes, right? There's someone who goes on a journey, or a stranger comes to town. There's all kinds of different archetypes of stories that we experience growing up, from the time our parents read us a bedtime story, right? Culture is passed down through stories. So storytelling is a big part of all of our lives, but it's something to think about. So through my years of reading literature, and then my love of television, I grew up as a TV addict. So between reading and watching TV, spent a lot of time taking in stories. But my dream was to work in the TV industry. So I worked for a year in advertising for Ogilvy and Mather Advertising in New York. And then I decided to move out to LA to try to get a job in the TV industry. And I had a number of jobs in the TV industry, very low level, assistant level jobs, temp jobs. So I was at Disney, I was at CBS, and then I got a job in the theme park business as a project manager. But each of these, if you think about theme parks, if you go to a theme park, so unfortunately we can't do it right now. I don't know if they're open yet, but if we go to a Disneyland or a Universal Studios, we may go for that 3-minute ride, but the experience starts as soon as we drive through those gates that say happiest place on earth, right? So they do a great job of creating a story and an experience, basically, right? So a big part of what we do, what I do in my teaching, what I do in my training, is create experiences where all of my students and all of the attendees in my programs go through an experience as if you are the star of your story, because we are. Each of us is the star in our own story, right? So that idea of storytelling and thinking visually and almost like picturing ourselves as a character in a movie is the foundation of everything that I do, and the foundation of the visual leadership approach. So I just want to explain just one using visual. So even if you can't draw, this is one of the things to think about. A lot of people say, oh, I can't draw, so this doesn't apply to me. If you ask a group of kindergartners, how many of you could draw? How many of them raise their hand? All of them, right? If you ask a group of business professionals, how many of you can draw? Very few, right? So between kindergarten and adulthood, have we lost our ability to draw or our confidence, right? So a big part of this is eliminate that I can't draw from your vocabulary. Any of us, if you can draw a circle, a square, or a triangle, you can draw, right? So here's a stick figure. We all have ideas, right? Visual thinking is about, how do I take that idea and frame it? And the picture frame here is a metaphor. How do I frame this idea in my mind's eye, right? And think about, who do I need to communicate this to? How do I get that idea out of my head and into someone else's head, with the goal being what? For them to say, I see what you're saying. So if you think about it, that's the foundation of every communication, whether it's a one-on-one conversation, a TED Talk, a webinar session like this. It's all about, how do you get an idea out of your head into someone else's? So hopefully tonight, everyone will leave here saying, oh, I see what he was saying. I see what Helena was saying. Now I get what visual thinking is all about. So I could be a better visual thinker and a visual leader going forward.
Sorry, I was unmuting myself right there. So throughout all of your experience, you have found that thinking and communicating visually can be much more effective and much more powerful than just communicating the traditional word, through words and numbers.
Yes.
What would you say about that famous saying that a picture is louder than speaks for 1,000
Yeah.
words, or but I just got it wrong, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, saying a
Yeah.
picture is worth 1,000 words has been around
There you go. Sorry.
forever. The Chinese philosopher from Confucius' time said, hearing something 100 times is not as good as seeing it once. Napoleon said, although he said it in French, probably, I don't know if he spoke English, he said that a good sketch is better than a long speech, right? So there's examples throughout all of history and across all cultures about how and why visuals and visual imagery communicating in that way is more impactful than just words or numbers, right? So if you think about it, cave drawings go back 40,000 years, right? So when they were painting things on the wall of a cave, that was long before any alphabet existed, right? So go from cave drawings of 40,000 years ago to the emojis and emoticons we're using in our texts and emails today, right? So a heart, right? If you send someone a heart, it looks like a Valentine, right? That's not what the heart of our human body actually looks like. If you gave someone for Valentine's Day a replica of an actual heart, I don't think they'd be too thrilled with that, right? So the heart,
No.
as we see it, the Valentine is a metaphor, right? So we communicate in metaphors. If you send someone a thumbs up, if you send someone a heart, a smile face, right? Those are all visual images that communicate a message, right? So that's why. So let's get into the brain science just a little bit. So if you ask why,
Yeah, please.
why visuals, right? So right now, there's 3 words that I always associate with visual thinking. When you use visuals, whether it's visual imagery or visual language, it enhances in 3 areas: attention, comprehension, and retention. And what's great is they kind of rhyme, so it's easy to remember, right? When you use a picture, when you use an image, when you use visual language, it captures people's attention. Like right now, I'm sure everyone is looking at this image, right? You're not looking at the words, you're looking at this guy's head with all of those images and the words going on in his head, right? So we're all focused. So hopefully, because there's an image on the screen, people are not checking your email or looking at your phone, right? So it captures your attention. In fact, an example of this, they've done studies. If you have a blog post that has no image versus a blog post that has an image, the ones with an image get read like 100 times more than the ones without an image. And again, that's just basic human nature. So that's about attention. Comprehension is about what? Understanding, right? If you have a visual image, you will understand it better than if someone explains it to you auditorily or through text, right? That's just, again, how the brain processes information. And there's a theory called dual coding theory, which means dual as in the 2 sides of the brain, left brain and right brain. If you deliver a message, a text plus an image, you're reaching both the left and the right side of the brain. So you're encoding that message in both sides of the brain as opposed to just one or the other, and that increases comprehension and understanding. And thirdly, retention. When we see a picture, we just remember it, right? Which do you remember more, the scenes from a movie or the scenes from reading a novel, in terms of reading the text, right? So again, because of dual coding theory, and also what's called the picture superiority effect, the science has shown that pictures are superior to text when it comes to both understanding and recall. So if you want to remember something, if you doodle it, if you draw it, that's a great way to embed it in your brain, in your memory. So just right here are 3 simple words that basically explain why visuals are so powerful. And they're doing a lot of scientific research these days that basically confirms all of this.
So Todd, is there a way in which we can tap into our brain, or anything practical that you can share so that we can think more visually?
Sure. I'd like to share with you, and I talk about this in my book, 4 ways to think more visually. So if people say, oh, I'm not visual, you may have heard either VAK, V-A-K, or VARK, V-A-R-K. So these are different sensory modalities, ways to deliver information. So V is for visual, A is for auditory, R is for reading and writing, and K is for kinesthetic, right? So some people say, oh, I prefer to read something. Other people say I prefer to watch a video. Other people say just I prefer to listen to a podcast or something, an audio book, right? Other people say I like to do things, with my hands, right? So think about how you would prefer to put together a piece of IKEA furniture, if at all. I would rather just hire someone. That's just me. But if you had to put together a piece of IKEA furniture, right? A visual person would look at the picture on the box and try to imagine what those pieces are going to look like when they're assembled, right? You visualize it, you almost assemble it in your mind's eye. An auditory person may like to have someone explain it to them, right? Explain to me and let me listen to how to put this thing together. A read and write person would prefer to read instructions. Unfortunately, IKEA does not come with instructions, so it kind of forces you to be visual, right? And then kinesthetic are the people, kinesthetic is about movement and touch, right? Kinesthetic people prefer to just dump the pieces out on the floor and just start putting them together, right? So that they like to learn through trial and error and hands-on. So think about your preferred learning style. In what way do you prefer to get work done, right? So we are not either or. We have all four of those, but just think about your preferred way to do things. So as a teacher or as a trainer or as a coach, you want to use all four of those methods, not just one or the other, because you're more likely to reach more people, right? Especially if we don't know what someone's preferred style is. If you use video, audio, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and reading and writing, you're basically delivering that message in those different ways. So I want to just talk about my 4 ways to think more visually. So one is using imagery and drawings. And I'm going to give you a very quick, I could do a 3-hour webinar just on this. So people are just getting the highlights and some of the key takeaways, hopefully to, if you picture an iceberg as a metaphor, this is just the tip of the iceberg, right? So if you want to get the whole iceberg, you're going to have to dive beneath the surface and do your homework, whether it's reading my book or there's so much else out there on visual thinking. But one is using imagery and drawing, right? So using pictures. The second category is using models and frameworks. The third is using metaphor and analogy. And the third is using storytelling and humor. So I'm going to give people some examples. Again, just so everyone knows, we're going to have a whole 20 minutes or more of Q&A. So start thinking about your questions and what are some of the things that you want clarification on. So just for right now, so for the first one, visual imagery and drawing. So I mentioned the IKEA example, right? The New York City subway map. I never thought I would say I missed the subway, but I desperately missed the subway. So it's been 3 months since I've been on a New York subway. So because I've been out in Connecticut and because of the pandemic. But think about the color coding of the subway lines, right? If you've ridden the subway, like if I need to go from where I live on the Upper East Side to Midtown on the West Side, I could picture the Q line, the brand new, well, not that brand new anymore, but the yellow Q line and how I would get from the Upper East Side to Midtown, right? So and if I needed to get downtown, I may say, oh, I need to transfer to the red line to go, right? So we think in terms of color, we picture the map in our mind's eye, and then we do it in reality. If data visualization, if we use graphs instead of numbers, that's a way of communicating visually. When I prepare to present, as you can see, I'm holding my remote control here, which is on my presenter's visual checklist. This is the checklist I use to say, do I have my batteries? Do I have my water? Do I have my flip chart markers, right? I could do this in a bullet point text, but think about the power of just looking at a visual and comparing it to what you have and how you're using that part of your brain to trigger your memory. And my brother and I did a workshop a couple of years ago at Fordham called Culture Crash. And we brought in a graphic recorder who basically did visual note taking. And you can see that's me and my brother down there in the lower left. Not I'm the one with the glasses. But you could see this is an example of someone. So think about that. Do you take notes visually when you're reading a book? Do you circle and highlight things? Do you doodle in the margins? That's just another way to process information. So I'm going to hit the pause button for right there and say, any thoughts or anything you want to talk about, Helena, related to the first category of imagery and drawing?
I think it's fascinating. What I would like to do is to have everyone who is on board tell us one instance really, really quick of how you have applied imagery in drawing. Just say, you know, subway map or IKEA map or one way like that. So toss it at the chat. Yeah, exactly. Yes, how do you use it on a daily basis? Because we all do. All right, so data visualization, mind mapping. Yeah, mind mapping is a great one. PowerPoint, yes, Kayla. Multimedia and video, yes. Even visualizing a page you've read or studied is visual, yes, of course. Yeah. PowerPoint slides, Venn diagram, exactly. So we all use this all day long, and it's an incredibly helpful tool when you realize how helpful, how much you use it, but also how much it can help you communicate with others. Shawnee says, use personas. I use photography, my side hobby. Oh, awesome. Marjorie says, what is data visualization? Tanya says, concept map. Yes, all of these are great. All of these are great. Photos.
I just want to answer Marjorie's question quick on data visualization. If you look at the upper right corner, all the graphs, right? Data visualization is taking numbers and creating a visual image to represent the So if you see a bar graph, a pie chart, that's data visualization. You're taking data, numbers, but you're communicating it in a visual way so that people can basically understand what you're talking about. So we can talk for hours about that, but in a nutshell, that's what data visualization is all about.
Yeah. Imagine, if you may, a spreadsheet filled with numbers, or the graphs and charts that Todd has there. So there's one that is much more appealing and much easier to understand than just the plain numbers.
Okay.
Okay, so Margie says pictures and diagrams. Yeah, yep, absolutely. Awesome. So great. I think everyone is using these.
Yeah.
So what's the next category, Todd?
Well, before we move on, just one real life example from me. I'm not going to tell the story. I talk about this in my TED Talk. So if you want to know the backstory, you're going to have to watch my TED Talk. Just look it up, Todd Church's Tedx, and you'll find it on the power of visual thinking. But I was once working on a project when I was 30 years old, and I was doing it in another country, and I had to communicate across cultural lines where neither of us spoke the same language, and I had to take out a pen and draw pictures in order to get the tools that we needed to get the job done. So this is just a little teaser for my TED Talk. I talk about it in my book, but you can also just watch my TED Talk, and I tell the full story about how in China, drawing these images pretty much saved that project. So that's a real life example for me from many years ago, earlier in my career. So let's talk about the second category, which is mental models and frameworks. So someone mentioned the Venn diagram, and also there's some overlap. So for example, Diana mentioned Venn diagram, which is basically what that is in the upper left. So the Venn diagram is both a model and it's an image. So these are not mutually exclusive. So I'm giving you these 4 categories, but there's a lot of overlap as well, right? But these are examples of frameworks. Who can tell us what the upper right is? That's one of the most famous visual models that there is in the world of psychology and management. Who can name it first?
Yeah, let's see.
Name that model. Maslow.
Busy Lane. Yes, Maslow's pyramid. Yes.
Lenore
all of them. Yeah. Everybody knows it. Awesome. Lenore, Harrison, Amina, Tanya, Dara, David, Matt. Yes, you're all right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So what's interesting is thinking about Maslow's model in terms of, it's a model of psychology 101, right? But think about how to use it as a management leadership tool, right? So as a company, physiological needs, are a paycheck, right? If someone gets a paycheck, they can cover those needs. Are you creating a safe environment of psychological safety and physical safety? Are you creating an environment of community and affiliation and team for love and belonging? Are you recognizing people in terms of esteem, right? Are you helping people become self-actualized? So you can actually use this in the workplace as a management leadership tool, but also think about how this applies to what we're dealing with today with the COVID pandemic. So here's my visual, right? So we're dealing with this dreaded enemy, right? So how is that impacting us in terms of our Maslow needs, right? So it's interesting to, look at a framework like this and say, oh, that's just theoretical, but it's nothing to look at it both as a leadership tool or to think about how is the COVID pandemic affecting you in your life by running it through the Maslow's hierarchy to see, a few months ago, you may have been upset because you didn't get the biggest office and, or you didn't get that promotion to the, the executive washroom or whatever. And now how important is that now that we've dropped the safety and psychological, right? Right now we're just in survival mode, right? Just trying to stay safe and get by. So that's a great example of how a model can help us frame our thinking and help us to be successful. Similarly, an org chart, right? This is basically a visual way to represent who reports to who in the company, right? What role you have, what are the relationships. And on the lower left, that's just an example of a process diagram, right? So a progress bar, right? If you watch that progress bar as you're downloading something, those are all visual models that represent reality. And those are ways by which we take the complexity and the messiness of life and work and put it in a framework. I did my first TEDx talk last year. I was supposed to do my second one last month at the Ferguson Library. Unfortunately, it was canceled because of the pandemic. That one was going to be on my first one was the power of visual thinking. My second was going to be on the magic of mental models. So when I eventually do it, I'm going to be talking a lot about how by thinking inside the box will help us think better outside the box. So you have to wait to see that, hopefully sometime in the fall or next year. Here's an example, just one quick, these are some of the models. So if someone takes my workshops or my NYU or Columbia classes, this is just a sample of some of the visual models that people take away from that experience, right? So again, people do not leave with a 30-page or 300-page manual. They leave with a sheet with all of these different models and frameworks to help them resolve their business issues. So any thoughts on that before we move on to metaphors and analogies?
I just want to open it up to everyone in the chat to also share a little bit as to how they've used models and frameworks. Marjorie says, New York State opening faces are an example of this. And I think she's right. The way they conveyed it into phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and the different representations that we've seen visually of that, I think she's right on target. So anybody else? SP is asking, what are good resources for creating visual models digitally? If you don't mind, SP, let's leave that for the end so that we can finish with Todd here, but we'll definitely get to that. Absolutely.
What else? What are some other examples?
Anyone else?
Models or frameworks that you've used, or this SWOT analysis. There is, if anyone's ever seen Simon Sinek's talk, Start with Why.
Start with Why. That's another one.
Circle is a model that we're all situational leadership, right? So there's so many out there, we don't even think about them or realize them. So there's 2 takeaways hopefully everyone will get from today. One is thinking more visually and being more aware of this. And the other is to start being more proactive in communicating more visually going forward. But are flowcharts a model or a framework? Basically, it's both, right? A model is a representation of reality, and it's a framework that represents the reality. So it literally it's a visual image, but it's also a model, which is also a framework, right? So in a lot of cases, things are not either or, but both. Same thing with a flowchart, right? It's a model or it's a framework. It's just a framework. Think about it literally. What does a picture frame do? It basically, frames, goes around the picture, right? Similarly, if you have a framework around some kind of concept, you're putting something in a box or within a frame so you can identify it and see it more clearly. So using a maze. So really great comments here. And again, we'll get to the questions more as we go forward. So let's get to metaphors and analogies. So here's a few examples. What do metaphors and analogies do? They simplify complexity. They make the unfamiliar familiar. They help to make the invisible visible. So there's a lot of benefits to using metaphors. So the one in the upper left, what might be, let's say I'm teaching my management leadership course at NYU or Columbia. What concept might that represent? Upper left, let's type in the chat box.
All right, I want to see a bonus, a gift, an incentive.
What might it mean metaphorically? What might be another? These are all good answers.
Knowledge.
Acknowledgement.
Thank you. Kindness.
Yeah. So one of the metaphors we use is that feedback is a gift.
Giving.
Right? If you get they're all right answers, but the rightest answer is feedback, right? So one of the things we say is a lot of times people are hesitant about giving other people feedback because they think I can't do it right, or who am I to give someone feedback, or I don't feel comfortable or confident, or I don't know how. But if you frame it as feedback is a gift, if you give someone feedback, you're giving them, like any gift, you could consider the thought behind it, or you could throw it out, right? So that's up to you. But feedback, if someone gives you feedback on something, and if it's framed properly and with good intention, it is a gift. So that's one of the ways to reframe and empower people to give each other feedback. What about the upper right? What might that be an image? Be a metaphor for? Planting an idea. Exactly right. So Carolina said it. Planting the seed of an idea. I'm a big baseball fan, so I use a lot of baseball analogies. Oh, you really hit a home run or knocked it out of the park, or you really struck out on that one, or that idea came out of left field, right? The benefit of baseball analogies or sports analogies is they are a shortcut to explain something. However, if people don't know baseball, it does the exact opposite, right? If a lot of my students are international students, many from China, so a 25-year-old female from China may not understand, or a baseball analogy may not resonate with her, right? So we need to come up with metaphors and analogies that are more universal, something from the arts, dance, theater, nature is always great, right? So you could say, I'm planting the seed for an idea. We're going to get to the root of the problem. I'm going to go out on a limb here, and let's hope this idea bears fruit, right? So right there, I used 5 different tree-related analogies or metaphors that anyone can relate to, right? So always be thinking about, when you're using metaphors and analogies, to think about the culture and what the other person knows and understands. What movie? Name that movie from the lower right. Who could get that first? This is one of the classic metaphors.
Who can get that right? Life is like a box of chocolates. Who said that?
Who said it, and what's the next line? So Forrest Gump is correct, and what's the rest of that sentence? Why is life like a box of chocolates? You never know what you're going to get. Right, Carolina got it, right?
All right.
So if you think about it, the only box of chocolates where you know what you're going to get are the Whitman samplers that come with that map on top, right? Where you can see which one. So you don't have to squeeze them all and try them, and like my brother used to do, put them back together and wedge them back in the box, right? Steve, if you're on the call, sorry to give that away, but if you think about that, life is like a box of chocolates because you don't know what you're going to get is a metaphor. It's also an example of storytelling. It's also an example of visual imagery because you're looking at this image, and the mental model part is if you've seen that movie, Forrest Gump, you may be replaying that scene from that movie in your mind's eye and reconstructing it. So right now, it says right here, just a few examples of using metaphors and analogies. In the chat box, what are some of your metaphors and analogies you like to use? Something is like something else. What are some common ones that you've either used or heard other people use? Let's get a collection of a few metaphors that are familiar to people. Set
Going
sail,
uphill.
going uphill.
Set sails. Life is short. Run, Forrest, run.
Again, this is where my poetry background comes in handy, thinking in terms of metaphors and analogies. But again, we use them all the time, right? Three-ring circus, great.
Mm-hmm.
What are some others?
Highway versus side roads.
That reminds me of the old George Carlin joke. Why do we drive on a parkway and park on a driveway? So we're going to leave it at that. And, right?
Yeah.
It's like riding a bike, right? Standing on a very high diving board. So these are all great. So we use them all the time. So I think the key is to be more intentional and think about what's a good metaphor analogy that will communicate my idea effectively to my audience, right? I think that's the key thing to keep in mind. This was one of my college textbooks, Bridges Not Walls. And the foundation of this was, and again, this is very relevant in today's age, right? And what's going on in the world. Bridges connect us while walls divide us, right? So the premise of this book is that with communication, we're trying to build bridges between people as opposed to walls that divide people. So you could take stones and bricks and build a bridge, or you could build a wall, right? Just like with words, we could build a bridge or we could build a wall. So I just love how this, this textbook from earlier from my college career is still so relevant. And at the time, I didn't really appreciate it until I stumbled upon it recently. Lastly, the last category, storytelling and humor. So storytelling is one thing, humor is an add-on. So humor is like a bonus. And humor, when we're talking about it, we're not talking about telling jokes. We're talking about finding the humor in humanity, telling an anecdote. Like if you were in my book, I talk about my boss at, I won't mention what TV network, but it has a C, a B, and an S in the title of it. My boss at this TV network, when I was working for her, once threw a box of pens at my head because I ordered the wrong ones. Actually, I didn't order the wrong ones. The shipping department sent up the wrong ones. But in retrospect, it's really funny because it's so crazy. At the time, it wasn't so funny, right? So there's a saying that comedy equals tragedy plus time. So at the time, it was very tragic and upsetting and humiliating. Looking back now, it's funny and ridiculous, but when you're going through it, it's not that funny. But I just told you a story, right? I painted a picture with words. In your mind's eye, you might have imagined me sitting at my desk, my boss's office door swinging open and feeling a box of paper-made pens being thrown at my head, right? I just told you that story, and you may have envisioned in your mind's eye, but I didn't show you my boss. I didn't show you what I looked like at the time. But that's a great example, a simple example of using visual storytelling to paint a picture with words, almost like creating a mini mental movie, right? So think about how often we do that, right? If someone says, how was your day today? And you say, oh, you wouldn't believe what happened to me today. Boom, that's a story, right? So a lot of people put that, just like people say, oh, I can't draw. A lot of people say, oh, I'm really bad at storytelling, but we're all storytellers. Children tell stories, grandparents tell stories, right? I was once doing a workshop for CEOs on storytelling, and one of the CEOs said, oh, I hate storytelling. I'm really bad at storytelling. And then I said, well, why do you say that? And he went on to tell this amazing story about why he was so bad at storytelling, right? And then we all looked at each other like, hey, you're not as bad as you think you are, right? So think about how you use stories in your life to communicate ideas. So as a manager, you may say to someone, hey, instead of saying do this or don't do this, you may say, let me tell you about the worst mistake I ever made, or let me tell you about the worst boss I ever had, or the best boss I ever had, right? We learn through stories. Stories are human, they're emotional, they're memorable. So think about how you can incorporate storytelling into your life and into your work. And those are the 4 categories. So what are some thoughts there?
Sorry, I've just unmuted myself. So tell us in the chat, what are some stories that you tell, or what, or things that you remember? For instance, what story do you remember of today? What did you read in the news? What did you watch on TV? What, a story about today? You don't have to tell us a whole story, but just say, president on TV, or story about such and such on TV.
Yeah, if you watch the news, those are stories, right?
If you watch the news, those are stories. Those are all stories, and that's what we remember. Okay, so Carolina says, as a therapist, I listen to my clients' stories daily. Margie says, Trump's niece won in court. So all of these are stories, yes, that we remember from the daily news or from our daily life. Dara says, I use storytelling and humor all the time, but reluctant to use it on job interviews. I
just want to address that one. One of my couple of suggestions. One is keep a journal. Write down the stories you want to tell. So when someone says, tell me about a time that you did something similar to this, you have a story ready. So just to address Dara's, if you're good at storytelling and humor outside of work, don't be reluctant to use it on job interviews as long as it's appropriate and relevant. That's the key thing. And I'm going to give you as an extra model, no extra charge. This is free on the house. The process called PARLA, P-A-R-L-A. And this is a behavioral interviewing process that you can use as either as the interviewer or interviewee. And PARLA stands for problem, action, results, learned, and applied. So if someone says, someone's trying to test to see whether or not you could do a job. They may say, tell me about a time where you did X. You could say, I once faced this problem. Here's the action I took. Here was the result of that action. And it could have been good or bad, doesn't matter. Here's what I learned from that experience. And here's how I would apply what I learned from that experience in this new job, right? So if you just tell someone a story, that's a great model, and it kind of addresses Dara's question about how do you use this in the job interview situation. That's a classic way. There's many other versions of that, but PARLA is one that really resonates with me, and I highly recommend using that. So again, here's what happened. Here was the situation, problem or situation. Here's the action I took, what I did. Here was the result. Here's what I learned, and here's how I apply that in this context. So thank you, Helena, for typing that in. So any other thoughts on storytelling?
Todd and Rose wants to make a comment.
Who does?
Pardon me?
Rose.
Oh, okay, yes. And we have, unfortunately, no way of bringing you in. Do you mind dropping your comment in the chat, or
I'm going to unmute her so she could ask her question.
Oh, okay, wonderful.
Okay, special guest appearance by Ann Rose.
Yay!
And Rose, you're going to have to unmute yourself.
Hi, I wanted to ask a question earlier, but he answered it. So that was from before. Sorry.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
All right, great. I love that.
All good, all good. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
And
so
Kevin just shared the STAR technique, which is another one: situation, task, action, and result. So there's many out there. That's a good idea. There's no one model or no technique or that's one size fits all. So whichever one works for you, do the research and find ones that resonate with you and that you feel comfortable using.
Fabulous. And then Kathleen, I just want to address this. Kathleen, hey Kathleen, is asking, will this get sent out as a recording? I have to go now. Yes, all of you will receive a copy of the replay, of course, definitely. So speaking of questions, going back to that, we've covered a lot in a very short time, but I want to be very cognizant that we have a lot of people in here and obviously a lot of questions. So as much as I could continue talking to you, Todd, for 3 more hours, yes, I definitely want to share you with the audience. So ladies and gentlemen, why don't we just get started with the Q&A session.
Couple of more points before we start the Q&A, just to kind of.
Oh, okay, please. No, please do. Please go ahead.
One is, in my book, Visual Leadership, you see an eye on the cover. At first, it was a blue eye because of my company, Big Blue Gumball. But then the realization was that the blue eye was exclusive or exclusionary. So we changed it to a rainbow eye, which represents diversity, inclusion, belonging, equity, right? It also represents innovation, creativity, color. So that's the reason for the rainbow eye. So one of the things I've been thinking about is in today's environment, as we turn the page, I love that. I'm going to do that again. I just learned how to do that, so I'm going to show off one more time. Let's flip the eye. So the one eye represents your leadership vision, right? We all have a vision. We all want to see the future and envision future possibilities, but we have two eyes, and the second eye represents the eyes of others. So in today's world, we need to, again, seeing through the lens of diversity, inclusion, belonging, with the Black Lives Matter movement and everything else going on in the world, we need to look at the world with empathy, compassion, openness, right? So if you think about using one eye for your vision and the other eye for other people's vision, together we can create a better world. So I think that's the way to look at the world, through not rose-colored glasses, but through two rainbow eyes. And I just want to wrap up with this quote, that if we can see the invisible, we can achieve the impossible. And with that, we could start our Q&A.
Look at that beautiful Q&A slide. I love it. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure that you are boiling, you know, that you're just, you know, bursting with questions for Todd. I know I still have so many questions. So please post them in the chat and we will start asking Todd. So let me, we had a question earlier that I'm going to try to find out. It's a very long chat. So whoever asked that question earlier that I said, hey, please save it for the Q&A session. If you could please repost it again, I would greatly appreciate it. It was about, some sources of visual, oh my God, okay, here we go. Thank you, SP. What are good resources for creating visual models digitally?
One of the challenges here, I want to focus more on the concepts and not necessarily the technology, because that's a tougher question to answer. There's so many good books, like Gar Reynolds' books like Presentation Zen, or Nancy Duarte's books like Slideology. So all those books help us conceptualize and design slides better, create better visuals and that type of thing. So everything I do is in PowerPoint. So when it comes to technology, there's so many different technologies out there, but I would say most people think of PowerPoint and the death by bullet point kind of thing of all text. PowerPoint has so many different ways of using visuals, and you saw just a few examples in my presentation. This was all PowerPoint. So that's my main technology. So we could take that on offline or save that for another conversation in terms of, you know, resources, but you know, digital resources. So I think that's a question more for the artists and the technology people in the crowd. Than mine is more on the soft skills side rather than the technology side of things.
Awesome. So Kevin says that's a beautiful Q&A slide. Yeah, I completely agree with you.
And I'm answering Kevin's question of what does Parla stand for as you're taking the next question.
Oh yeah. Okay. Oh, you're typing away. Okay, yes. Cool. So SP says, thank you, Tananella. Of course, happy to do that. Okay, so I have a question for you right here while people are typing in their questions. So as we are moving into a more, let's say, remote workplace, how do you lead teams that are spread out remotely, internationally perhaps, and who all of them have different ways of understanding things? How do you leverage empathy? How do you leverage visuals? How do you do that? And at a very practical level.
Yeah. We could talk for hours just about how to manage and lead in a remote world as we're living it right now. But so I'm going to focus on the visual component. One is, we're all living on Zoom, right? We're all living our lives on Zoom. When you're in meetings or in classes or workshops, not here, we can't do it here because of the song. I think there's like 200 people or 80 people on the call. But if you have a group of 10 or 12 people, have everyone have their cameras on. Be presentable. One of the things I talk about is the 3 V's: visibility, voice, and value, right? So visibility is, are you seen and how are you seen? Voice is, are you heard and how are you heard? And value is about how are you seen as making a contribution, right? So if you're not seen, people don't know you exist. If you're not heard, people are not getting the benefit of your wisdom and your ideas. And if you're not seen as being someone who adds value and makes a contribution, people will say, oh, it's not so important to have this person on the call, or we could do this without them, or they don't call on you to say, hey, Elizabeth or Helena, we want to hear what you have to say on this, right? So think about visibility, voice, and value. I also talk about CAP in my book, confidence, assertiveness, and presence. Think about trying to boost your confidence, but you don't want to be overconfident because then it turns into arrogance, right? So you want to be confident, but not too confident. You want to be assertive, but not too assertive. And you want to have presence, but you don't want to have too much presence. There's a saying that you should drip on people, but not drown them. That's a good metaphor to keep in mind. Some people try so hard to be so visible and so loud that they just become noise, and people drown, and people just drown them out or don't listen to them anymore. So it really is one of those it depends kind of things. Introverts need to speak up more and work harder to be more visible, have more voice, and add more value. Extroverts, they talk a lot, but a lot of what they say may be noise. So believe it or not, I'm an extreme introvert, back of the room, behind the scenes bookworm. But because I do what I do, I have to, and because I'm from New York too, that's why I talk fast and loud. You know, we need to be heard. We need to speak up and speak out. One of my colleagues at NYU, Nancy Ankowitz, wrote a great book called Self-Promotion for Introverts. So if you're, I'm gonna give her book a little plug, if you're an introvert or you manage and lead introverts, Self-Promotion for Introverts by Nancy Ankowitz is a great book on how introverts can be heard. And also the book Quiet by Susan Cain, C-A-I-N. She did an amazing TED Talk that changed the world. So if you want to learn more about introverts and how to be heard, both of those are two of my top resources. And speaking of visuals and metaphors, I have on my desk this little shell from a beach. It's supposed to be a snail shell that my wife gave me to remind me to speak slower. It just doesn't work, so I'm just going to get rid of that. No matter what I try to do, I just can't slow down because I have so much to say and so little time. So next
This
question.
is awesome. Okay, so next question comes from Nishi. Hey, Nishi, how can I deal with distractions when practicing visualization?
Say that again?
How can I deal with distractions when practicing visualization?
I was distracted by the text box, so I didn't hear what you said. So that's a real life example. We're trying to juggle so many things. We're multitasking, right? So you're asking me a question. I'm thinking of my response. I'm also looking at the chat box. I'm also looking at the clock to see how much time we have left, right? We live in a world that is just, you know, even when we're working from home, then you may have kids or pets or spouses, right? So we have dinner time is coming, right? So we're all juggling all these different things. One of the powers of visuals, as I mentioned before, that attention, comprehension, and retention, if you could use visuals, whether it's stories, if you say to someone, hey, can I tell you a story? Or can I tell you about what happened to me today? You're capturing someone's attention. So even if you're not using a slide, it would be kind of weird to be in just a one-on-one conversation, start pulling up a flip chart, right? And start drawing something out or a napkin sketch. Although I do that sometimes too. But again, we need to try to get people's attention, and we're always battling people's phones, right? In today's day and age, right? So sometimes, especially as a manager, a leader, a parent, sometimes it's good to just put your phone down, turn it off, put it in a drawer, and give the person your undivided attention. Because again, we're battling so many different stimuli that we really need to kind of slow it down and focus so that we can, you know, help people out and listen better. I think listening, when we do 360, let's get into 360s, but when people get feedback, listening is the category that people score themselves the highest in and other people score them the lowest in. So it's the biggest gap. I would say the biggest gap is between the ears. We just don't take the time to listen. So if we use visuals, and even one of the things we haven't talked about is just using hand gestures and body language, facial expressions. That's all part of visual thinking, right? Visual communication. If someone's talking to you and you're just looking down and your arms are crossed, you're sending a visual signal that you either are upset or you're not that interested, right? So just eye contact is a great way to visually show that I'm focused on you and you have my undivided attention.
That's a very, very good point. Okay, so next question. How do you balance them? And PC is saying confidence versus arrogance.
Yeah, confidence, I think it's almost like we know it when we see it, right? You want to be confident. One of the definitions of confidence, and this is by Rosabeth Moss Cantor from Harvard. She said that confidence is the expectation of a positive outcome, right? So she basically said, if you go into a situation and expect a positive outcome, you're going in with confidence. One of the famous phrases is act as if. If you act as if, you're successful. If you act as if you're prepared, assuming you did the preparation, you'll have more confidence. I play softball on a number of teams, although no softball season this season, unfortunately. But if you step up to the plate to go to bat, acting as if you're a good hitter, you're going to hit better than if you went up there saying, oh, I'm going to strike out, or I'm never going to be able to hit against this pitcher, right? If you're about to do a presentation, and get up on stage and say, oh, this is going to be terrible. I'm going to forget everything. I'm going to freeze, right? That negative self-talk diminishes your confidence. So we want to have the confidence, but you need to do the practice and preparation that will give you the confidence when the time comes. So, and in terms of arrogance, again, that's overconfidence, and that's acting like you know everything, and again, that's a turn off to people. So, you know, you try to even if you are the quote smartest person in the room. One of my favorite leadership books, I just want to give a plug to Marshall Goldsmith, who wrote the book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. He talks about the 20 habits that you need to break to be more successful. And he says a lot of successful people are successful not because of how they are, but in spite of how they are, right? So it's great to be smart, but if you act as if you're the smartest person in the room all the time and you're always trying to show people how smart you are, again, people are going to stop listening to you, right? That's where your intelligence is taken over by your arrogance, right? So there's a lot of, so his 20 tips are, I would highly recommend that book, Marshall Goldsmith's What Got You Here Won't Get You There. I know I'm throwing a lot of resources out on you, so if you miss any, put them in the chat box, or if we miss them, you can always, we'll tell you more later about how you can contact me, but if you missed anything or you have other questions after this, we'll tell you at the end how you can reach me for any other questions that we don't get to, because we're not going to get to every question in the chat box.
Yes, definitely. So I just tossed on the chat the book about Marshall Goldsmith and the one about Susan Cain, Quiet. But then you mentioned the one about your colleague, and we missed that. So if we could add that in there as well, that would be great. But let's just move on because we still have a few minutes left and so many questions. Okay, so let's see. Hang on for a second. Do you have any advice for applying visuals when pitching a product aside from the actual product? Is it better to focus on storytelling, metaphors, and analogies?
My answer to most questions, this is probably the biggest thing you could take away from tonight. The answer to 90% of questions is 2 words: it depends. So that seems like a cop-out, but every situation is different. There's a saying from Greek philosophy: you can't set foot in the same river twice because both the river changes and the person changes. Similarly, we never have the same situations. I've been working for 30 years and I've faced a lot of different situations. There's always similarities, but they're never exactly the same because people change, times change. Right now we're in the COVID world, moving towards the post-COVID world. All the old rules don't apply anymore, right? So we're constantly having to reinvent and figure things out. So similarly, my answer to that question is it's never either or, it's usually both and. Right? It's usually some combination of here's a model, but what's the story that will go along with it? What's the metaphor I could tell? Here's the visual image. What's the story that I tell that goes? Does the image speak for itself, or do I use a metaphor and the story to go along with it? So I would say it's the combination of all these techniques that will help to make you most successful. So that's what I would that's how I'd answer that question.
Awesome. Now, Stephen is asking, can you talk about how we see ourselves and how people see us?
Sure. I mean, that's, again, a long question and kind of complex, but one of the visual images I use in my workshops and classes is a picture, and you may have seen it. It's one of those memes that goes around. A little cat or a kitten looking in a mirror, and in the mirror, there's a reflection of a lion, right? So on the positive side, and see, that's a perfect example. You're not looking at the image, but I just painted that image with words, right? Picture a cat looking in a big mirror and there's a lion in the mirror, right? The positive way of looking at that is that cat has aspirations to be bigger and better than he or she is, right? The danger of that is if you are a cat and you act as if you're a lion, you can get yourself in a lot of trouble, right? So that's almost like the confidence versus the arrogance question that someone asked before. So again, that's a great example of a visual image. I described it in words so you can picture it in your mind's eye, and hopefully that's a good metaphor of, is my reflection accurate, or am I distorted, or what do I have to do to become that lion that I have the potential to be? So that's just one way to answer that question.
Awesome. So we have come to the full hour, and I just want to be very cognizant of everyone's time. I'm delighted to continue, and Todd has kindly agreed to continue if there are any more questions. So we invite all of you, if you want to stay, we will stay on and we'd love to have you here, but we completely understand if some of you have to leave. So please know that you are free to do so. You will still get the recording for the full session. So Todd, the next question that I'd like to ask you is, we've talked about how to see ourselves, how to paint our picture, but what if we're looking at going forward and we have a vision in our minds, what are some practical steps that we can take to turn it from a mere vision in our minds to actually moving forward and making it happen?
Okay, great. Just in the interest of time, because some people have to leave, they just said, can I just wrap up and then we'll address that question? So my last few,
of course, absolutely.
So just my last few things. One is, if you're interested in more, feel free to check out my book. I would love that. My book is just one. These are some of the books that shape my thinking. These are the books that influenced me. And there's so much out there. And these books are listed in my book, in the resources, but also you'll get a copy of this video. And if you can get a PDF of the slides, this will be in there as well. So you don't have to feel like you have to write all this stuff down. So lastly, my new website is launching next week. So you're among the first in the world to hear about this. So if you go to, my company is still bigbluegumball.com. So anything related to management leadership training, you can contact me through bigbluegumball.com. But for speaking and for my book, toddchurches.com is launching next week. There you can see things about my TED Talk and my book. And the main thing is, if you go to the contact page and you fill out just putting your name and email address to get on my newsletter list, you can download a copy of my top 52 book recommendations that will help you to become a more visual leader. So that's a free giveaway if you just if you sign up on my site. And with that, that wraps up the official part of the presentation. And again, I'm happy to stay on for as long as we need to. But thank you for everyone for being here.
Wonderful. So thank you, everyone. Elizabeth, do you want to say anything just to wrap this official part up?
Sure. I think, Helena, we still want to get back to your question that you posed, because one of our participants is really looking forward to that answer.
Okay.
Wonderful.
One other reminder, if you are leaving, if you want to save the chat box, if you click on the 3 dots at the very bottom of the chat, you'll be able to save all of the chat comments and all the recommendations and everything else. And again, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. If you feel free, just look up Todd Churches. I'm the only one, and link in with me and we'll be connected. So thank you. And let's get to that question.
I think there are 2.
All right.
One is, have you worked using visuals with people with special needs or disabilities? That's one.
Okay, let's start with that one. I personally have not, but I've talked to other people who have, therapists, doctors. Visuals help everyone. Visuals, if someone is sight impaired, that might be a different situation. But for seeing people, again, the visual images chosen need to be relevant to the situation and appropriate for the audience. So we need to be more culturally diverse in terms of the PowerPoint slides that we use, the images we choose. Real life example, in my classes, I do a leadership quotes quiz. And what I did was I created visual slides of all the people who said those quotes. It was not until I created the visual slides that I realized that most of the quotes were from middle-aged white men, right? Once I saw the faces and it was like, wow, I had the realization. So then I changed out a lot of the quotes to add more diversity. So I added Ken Chenault from American Express, and Indra Nooyi, who's from India, who's the CEO of Pepsi, and Ursula Burns, who's from African-American woman from Brooklyn, New York, who is the CEO of Xerox for years, right? So if we're not aware of it, we could innocently make that mistake, but that's where the power of visuals really can, it's something in text, I didn't see it until I saw the visual version, and I was like, wow. So it was an innocent mistake, but I was able to correct it once I had that insight. So that's what I would say. Be aware of your own biases and assumptions. And again, we may be doing something innocently, but we need to be more than ever culturally aware and seek to diversify everything that we do. So if we're dealing with someone with special needs, you need to have experience in that and know what's going to resonate with that person and what's appropriate.
Wonderful. So we're getting I'm sorry, Elizabeth, go ahead.
There was another question that came up before we sort of start to shut down, is where do you start a visual presentation to an audience you don't know, as in a freelance employment situation? So when you're going in blind and you don't know who the client is or what they're looking at. So.
Well, what's interesting is using the phrase going in blind in the context of visual thinking, right? So we need to, I think, open our eyes, and we should try never to go into any situation blind. We should always be thinking about who's my audience and what's my purpose, right? If we go, and again, if you are going in blind, if you have a very mixed audience, if you really have no idea who you're speaking to, then stick to things that are universal. There's usually some reason someone asked you to speak. So you can always ask that sponsor or that whoever brought you in, who am I talking to? You know, what's the persona? What's the demographics? You know, again, in terms of diversity, we want to be, again, hit all the different learning styles, but we also need to use examples and tell stories that are more universal if we don't know specifically. If you're talking to a group of, you know, financial people, you may want to use more financial metaphors, analogies, and stories, and flowcharts and graphs. If you're talking to an artistic community, you may want to do things that are more design-oriented, right? So always try to find out as much as you can about your audience.
This is a really interesting one, Todd. Do you have to be enrolled as a graduate student to take your class at NYU or Columbia?
Yes, unfortunately you do. They are both graduate master's degree programs. But here's something that I have not even announced yet. I'm going to start offering, probably in the fall, master's level visual leadership courses that I'll be announcing. So if you sign up for my email list on my website, I'm going to be announcing when I'll be doing that. So the good thing is you're going to be getting my NYU and Columbia type content and delivery without having to pay whatever, the $40,000 a year, or whatever you have to pay to get into the master's degree program. So I'm looking forward to doing that. I'm also going to be doing some visual leadership book club discussions. So again, if you get on my mailing list and get my book, we're going to have meetings where we'll be discussing all of the things that we talked about tonight and much, much more.
Oh, I will definitely sign up for that.
Sign up for that one. Here's another one. Practical steps that you can take to turn your vision into reality.
That's kind of a broad question. I kind of would, that's another one of those, it depends. Is your vision to live on planet Mars? That's one thing, right? Is your vision to start a business, so part of this, what is your vision? Is it realistically achievable? I don't know if you're familiar with the acronym SMART goals, S-M-A-R-T, but if you set a goal or have a vision, if you make it SMART, which is it needs to be specific, as opposed to general. I want to make my vision a reality. That's very general. I need to know more specifically what is that vision. Is it measurable? Peter Drucker said if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And Peter Drucker is one of the famous management gurus. So you need to find out some way to measure where you are to where you want to be. Is it achievable? Is it realistically achievable? Is this like a pie in the sky kind of dream, or is this something that you could actually do? Is it relevant? Is it meaningful to you? Because if it doesn't really matter, then why even do it? And the last one is the T, is being time focused or time bound, right? You need to have a deadline. You need to have a plan. You need to put in milestones. This is saying that which could be done at any time will most likely be done at no time, right? So if you say someday I'm going to do this, you may not do it. If you say by the end of this summer or by the end of this year, then you have a time frame. I've been working on my book for about 10 years, and one of my friends, Brian Mattamore, who Helena knows, he's in our pro speakers group, he said to me, until you have a book deadline, you're probably never going to do it. So until I got a publishing deal through my agent, and I literally had a drop dead date, the manuscript had to be done by September 1st of 2019, all of a sudden I had a deadline that forced me to spend the entire summer locked away in this office working on my book. But so I worked on it for years and years. It wasn't until I had a specific deadline that I said it's now or never, right? So if you think about setting a SMART goal for your vision, you're more likely to achieve it.
That's awesome. I also have a question, and this deals with jargon. We live in a, each of us, by virtue of whatever it is that we do, are familiar with our own jargon.
Yes.
And we use it every day, and acronyms are everywhere. Yeah. How do you deal with that in a visual way?
Yeah, well, first of all, jargon and acronyms are a great shortcut for people who are in the know, and it does the exact opposite and alienates people who are not, right? And every industry, every company has its own acronyms and jargon. One time I was at a networking event and I mentioned to someone, oh, I used to work for AMA, American Management Association, and this guy kept asking me, do you know so-and-so, do you know so-and-so? He was talking about the American Medical Association, and this other guy said, I thought you were talking about the American Marketing Association, right? So I said AMA, and we're having this conversation, and yet none of us was speaking, talking about, I see what you're saying. None of us saw what the other person was saying because we all were using the same AMA to represent three completely different organizations, right? So one tip is the first time you use any acronym or jargon, define it. So I used to work, when I used to work for the AMA, the American Management Association, blah, 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 right? As soon as you do that, you eliminate that the unknown. So same thing with jargon. Some people use acronym jargon intentionally to show how smart they are, again, like we were talking about before, or to alienate people or to cut people out. Don't ever be afraid to ask someone, oh, you just mentioned AMA, what does that stand for, right? There's a lot of conversation now about VUCA. We live in a VUCA world. Does anyone know? Just type in the chat box if you know what VUCA, V-U-C-A stands for, just for curiosity, if anyone's familiar with that. In fact, now we're living in a hyper VUCA world. It's even more VUCA than ever. Does anyone know what VUCA stands for? Yes, I know, Elizabeth. Who knows what VUCA stands for?
Okay.
Okay,
Let's
I'll tell
see.
you. VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, right? Think about the world we're living in of pandemics and social issues and chaos, right? It's more volatile than ever. It's more ambiguous than ever. No one has any idea what the future holds. It's more complex than ever with battling this dreaded disease. And it's more, so I said, it's volatile, uncertain, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, right? It's more, it was always that way, but it's more than ever, right? So in this VUCA world we're living in, how do we navigate this? But if you say, I hear a lot of people mention VUCA lately without explaining what it means, and people like, as soon as you lose someone, it's like they check out or they feel like, oh, I'm too stupid or I shouldn't ask. Always ask. If you don't know, just ask. Or Google it. 90% of the time, pull out your phone and just look it up. And then if you can't find it, then ask. But that's a great shortcut. Use your digital device as a kind of a cheat sheet. It's now allowed.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Let's see. Okay, so any other questions in here? Let's see.
That was.
Oh, okay. So somebody was saying, I do not see the 3 dots at the bottom of the chat box in order to copy the chat discussion. What we can do is add or send out an excerpt of the chat with the resources that were mentioned for those of you that don't have that feature in their chat. We can definitely
just to point
do that.
it out,
That's
if
not
you
a
go
problem.
down to the bottom where it says to, and it says type message here, if you go all the way to the right, you should see 3 dots, and you click on it, and it'll say
3 dots in a little box.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't see it, we'll send it to you. But just so you want to learn how to do this if you're on Zoom calls, because it's one of those things I always forget to do, and afterwards I kick myself, so I always remind myself. Sometimes I even put a Post-it up on the corner of my screen, so I remember as soon as I look to click leave meeting, I see it, and it reminds me to save the chat.
Okay. Margie is saying, I don't see it. No worries, Margie. We'll definitely pull out those resources and add them to the follow-up email that you'll get. Okay, so what I would, Marjorie says, please see Art Curator comment above. Let's see, hang on for just a second. Let me find it, Art Curator. Oh, right here. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm an art curator and I think very visually. However, some in my field think more in terms of word and theory. I know the visual is very powerful. I've seen projects greenlighted simply by sending someone to an exhibition or showing great images, but it's hard to deal with those who must have detailed written descriptions.
Mm-hmm. Here's the thing. You may like to speak Spanish, but if your person you're talking to speaks Japanese, you need to speak Japanese, right? So we need to speak the language of the stakeholders. So even if we have a preference, we need to translate our speak into the other person's language. The best is if you do multiple, right? If you do visual, auditory, read and write, and kinesthetic, if you hit all of those. But sometimes we need to modify, again, some people like a lot of data. Some people say, I want to see the Excel spreadsheet. Other people say, I want to see a picture, right? So you need to modify your message to meet your audience. And I think it's as simple as that. Even though it may not be our preference, we have to speak their language. In fact, one of the exercises I do in my NYU class is I have my students translate HR speak, because it's an HR master's program, into the language of technology, finance, the senior leadership, all the other departments. So how would you explain this HR concept? Because let's say you need funding for an HR initiative. The CFO, Chief Financial Officer, is not going to fund it if they don't understand it, right? The marketing person is not going to know how to market it if they don't understand it. The technology person is not going to know how to install it if they don't know what it is, right? So we need to learn multiple languages that include, and visual thinking is just one of those languages.
That's a great explanation as to how the modern world works and how each one of us brings a different gift to an organization, but at the same time, with that gift that we bring, there's a different vision and a different way in which we like to see things.
Yeah, yeah. And it's not right or wrong, it's just different, right? So,
no, it just is. Yeah, exactly. All right, so let me go back and see all of these. I think if I see so many more comments. Are there any more questions?
Harrison, thank you
Any
for your
more
comment. He just wrote,
questions?
congratulations on the book. Yes,
Yeah.
I've been talking about this for a long time. And visual leadership in 2020 to help you see more clearly just the timing. So that maybe it was meant to be that I put my book out in 2020 for that reason, right?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I want to ask a set of questions for everyone that is still here. So in thinking about what you heard here today, what is one of your biggest takeaways? Please put that in the chat. Oh, the silence is killing me. Awesome. Okay, Lenore says communication, multimodal stories, says Greg. Hey, Greg, how are you? The power of visuals. Think more visually. Yay. All right. Confidence is key to everything. Yes. And I loved that that definition of confidence that you gave, Todd, from the Harvard professor. I like that very much. Yes. Okay. So, oh my God.
In fact, I always talk about that to my students. I write about that in my book. I used to work in the TV industry and I ended up having to leave because I kept not getting promoted. And you always think, oh, if I work really hard and put my head down and do good work, I'll be promoted. But it was always the people, the extroverts, the people who showed up in meetings uninvited. I always thought it was obnoxious, but I didn't have the confidence to raise my hand, to speak up and speak out in meetings. So that worked against me, right? So that confidence is key. And part of building your confidence is to prepare and to practice, to anticipate and do your homework. And again, as you practice more, as you build your confidence, you'll take more risks. As you try more things, you'll get better at things. As you get better, you'll have more confidence. So it really is a cycle, or like a ball that rolls down a hill and gets bigger and bigger. So that's what I would say is start small wherever you are, and little by little, in terms of visibility, voice, and value, you'll build your confidence.
So somebody's asking if you could please repeat the definition of confidence from the Harvard professor.
Sure. She said confidence is the expectation of a positive outcome. So if you go in thinking, oh, this is never going to work, or I'm never going to get that job, or I'm not going to be picked, or no one ever listens to me, you're going in with negativity, which diminishes your confidence and it diminishes your impact and influence. If you go in saying, hey, this is a great idea, I really did my homework, I really believe in this, you speak of it with passion and purpose, that confidence shows through, just like your lack of confidence shows through. So if you go in with an expectation of a positive outcome, you may not get that positive outcome, but you're more likely to get it than if you don't, right? Henry Ford famously said, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're probably right, right? So if you go in with an I can, yes I can, little engine that could attitude, right? You're more likely to go in with confidence and people will believe in you. It gives you credibility and they're gonna buy into your idea. But if you pitch an idea and you say, oh, I'm not really sure if this will work and it could have all these problems, they're not going to buy into it, right? That doesn't mean you shouldn't look at the downside. Here's the benefits, here are the costs and the risks, right? You want to go in prepared, but you want to go in and pitch your idea with positivity and with confidence.
Yeah, very, very good point. Something else that I want to ask the audience. Thank you so much for your takeaways. I love that you've gotten so much out of it. These are great. These are absolutely great. So what is one thing that you're going to do moving forward? Because we were talking briefly about, I mean, after we learned all about visual leadership and the importance of these visuals, of how we use them to communicate, how we use them to see ourselves, the importance of empathy and of seeing someone else as they want to be seen. What is one thing that you are going to do with what you just learned? All right, Sabrina says, use more metaphors. Sketch out my SMART goals. Awesome. Busy Lane. Awesome. Review my marketing plan. All right. Kay McLean. Takeaway, visuals, visualize. Visualize. In multicultural context, awesome. Okay, Laura, collect universal metaphors. Yes.
Also about metaphors, if you pay attention, you'll start noticing how often metaphors are used. People use them so often, it just becomes part of everyday language. You don't even realize you're using them or other people are using it. So I think hopefully today you'll be more hyper aware and notice how often metaphors are used. And if you look at most blog post titles have a metaphor in them. Just look for that. Just go on LinkedIn or Facebook, look at the titles of books, look at the titles of articles and blog posts. I would say 80% of them have some metaphor somewhere in the title.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one of the best people out there is Seth Godin. I know, Helena, you interacted with him many times. He is a master of metaphor, M-O-M. He's a mom, master of metaphor. Almost he writes a blog post every single day, and almost every day the title is a metaphor. So if you don't know Seth Godin, Godin, I highly recommend you subscribing to his daily blog posts. They're so simple and so powerful, and I've been reading them every single day for probably 15 or 20 years now.
Yes. He is fantastic. He is a genius. So yes, if you do not subscribe to his blog, it's highly recommended. It's a super short blog every single day. It gets to your inbox and it's a joy to read. And it will also make you think very deeply. It's great. Thank you for adding that to the chat, Seth Godin. Okay, so Barbara says, I will doodle more and listen better to others. Shawnee says, trust in myself and my product. I already have what I need to succeed. All right, I love hearing that. Awesome. Journal my stories from Laura. That's great. I love what you said, Todd, about keeping a journal of stories, because we all have so many, but then when it comes time, it's almost when you're at a party and somebody says, okay, tell me a joke. You draw a blank completely. But when prompted to put in the scene, but if you have them right there and you need them for anything, it would be just easy to go back to your journal.
Yeah, and the physical act of some people prefer to type, which is fine, or put it in your phone, or but the physical act of writing, science has shown it activates another part of your brain, and you'll remember it better, right? So it's one thing to type something. Like I tell all my students, leave your laptops at home. If you want to look something up on your phone or whatever, that's fine. But they come with a pad and a pen ready to draw. So if I'm teaching a 4-box matrix, they will draw it out as I present it to them on the whiteboard or on the PowerPoint slide. It's through that physical act of experiential learning and interactivity of drawing the quadrants and filling in those boxes. It increases attention, comprehension, and retention, and my students do better. And they can actually reconstruct those models from memory because they drew them out. They would not have been able to do that if they just saw it in a textbook or saw it on a PowerPoint slide.
Yeah, there is a very powerful connection between the hand and the brain. Yes, you're absolutely right. Okay, so Marjorie says, use these tools to move forward on a project I've been thinking about for some time, but which is somewhat outside of her comfort zone. Anywhere to find more step-by-step advice?
Again, I would need to know more detail, and it's hard to say. So using these tools to move forward on the project.
This is a great place to start, if I may say so.
Yeah, that's the thing. We're talking about drawing and taking notes. When you read a book, whether it's mine or any other book, Helena was saying that too. My books are marked up with bookmarks, circles, highlighters, margin notes. At the end of every chapter in my book, there's an exercise for you to fill in the blanks. When you interact with the material, again, it's going to have more impact and you're going to remember it. So that's what I would say. It's the physical act of drawing, circling, doodling. I always read something with a pen in my hand. Again, it just helps you to focus, but also it solidifies it in your brain. So in terms of a step-by-step process, it's to, outside of your comfort zone. I don't know what the step-by-step process would be. It kind of depends on what the project is. So I would need a little more details. That's a tricky one to answer.
All right.
I'm not going to make stuff up. That's not the key thing. If you have no answer, you're better off saying, I really can't answer it right now, than to just make something up, right? Because then you lose your credibility and your authenticity. So I'm going to say for that one, I would have to think about it, Marjorie.
All right. So Lenore says, any advice for presenting artwork? This is inherently visual.
Yeah, I would say, who are you presenting it to and for what purpose, right? So are you presenting it to someone who may bid on it and at an auction? Are you presenting it to someone to see where it's going to go, whether it fits into the gallery exhibit, right? So that's another, it depends. So I always say, who's your audience and what's your purpose? So that would need to be determined in order to answer that question.
Very good. From Jerry, for PowerPoint, how much visualization should be used? Do you have visuals on every slide, or are you using visuals only for important topics or ideas?
Again, another it depends, but if you notice with this PowerPoint presentation, there was very little text, right? If I go back, here, I do a fast, I do this in my classes sometimes. I'm gonna give you the, take a look at the slides. Just hopefully you will have, if you have a sense, look away, visuals, and look how little text, and look how much we talked about tonight, right? Very little text. All the text was happening in the chat box. Even this, right? This could have been bullet point after bullet point. This was a visual representation of how do you get someone to see what you're saying. So I'm very, I'm a visual person. I say the more visuals, the better, and the less text, the better. Less is more. So you can always send people the text afterwards, right? You never want to compete with your slides, right? This is probably the most text I have on any slide in here, right? Because if I put up text, what are you doing? You're reading, you're not listening to me. And as a presenter, the focus should always be on you. There's a lot of stuff on here, but again, these are all visual snapshots. These are not intended for you to be reading the fine print. So that's another thing. It's like this, again, this is a representation. So again, less is more when it comes to the use of visuals versus text.
Definitely. Okay, so Katie is asking, any particular site with visuals that we can use to include and present our quotes?
One of the no-nos is to go, what most people do is just go to Google Images and just pull images off there, which depending on the situation is not really acceptable. So I can't say, yes, you should do that. People do that anyway. I subscribe to iStock Photo and Shutterstock, but both of those are paid sites. There's a lot of free sites out there. So if you just Google, free image sites, there's Flickr, I think it's Flickr. So just look for, who's a great person to always, this guy, Nolan Hames, I'll put his name in the chat box. He's one of the masters. He's one of the top 20 PowerPoint designers in the United States. He's considered a PowerPoint master certified by Microsoft. He has a blog post he put out where he talks about all of his free image resources that he recommends to people. So I don't know them off the top of my head, but you could always, if you go to his website, I bet you could find it. So I'm gonna put his name in the chat box right now, and you could, Unsplash, Nancy Siegel. My web designer, Nancy Siegel, is on the call. So round of applause for Nancy. I don't know if you were here.
Yay!
So this right here is all, right here, this is the work of Nancy Siegel right here, my new website, which will be launching.
Beautiful work, Nancy. Yeah. Beautiful.
And she'll be proud of me that I put this up on the screen to entice people to sign up for my email list.
There you go. There you go. There's another site called Pixabay. So there are so many sites out there where you can use their royalty-free pictures that are just given to you basically for free, or you just subscribe to it, but there's nothing for you to pay, and you can use them and put together beautiful quotes or use them for presentations or something like that. So we are now at 7:28, and I want to check in with you if you guys have any other questions. Okay, the name of the PowerPoint designer is Nolan Hames. It's right there, NOLANHAIMS. And
Marjorie, it's right above yours. So we're typing it
right above yours, Marjorie.
Probably.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Then Lenore says, it seems to me that maybe when presenting art might be good not to talk too much. That's right. Let the art talk.
Yes. Very
exactly.
Often
all right.
Do more listening than talking.
Exactly. Okay. So you have given us one takeaway. You have told us what you can do moving, one thing that you're going to do. And now my final question for all of you is, how about an outcome? What about all this? How will what you learned here tonight will make it better going forward? So let us know in the chat. Oh, and Margie says, wonderful presentation. Oh, thank you so much, Margie. It's so wonderful to have you here.
We always, one of the things that we always talk about is insights, actions, and outcomes. So Helena kind of walk you through that. Insight is what did you take away? Action is what are you going to do? And outcome is what are you going to achieve from what you learned and what you're going to do when you apply it. So always be thinking whenever you do a workshop in terms of insights, actions, and outcomes. And that way, because otherwise it's very easy to forget or say, I want to do all this stuff. So just pick one thing. Just start with one thing that you could do that's going to have an impact, and then you can build from there.
Exactly, exactly. So Bobby says, better teacher, better teacher and better collaborator. Awesome. PC says, how did you define insight? That's for you, Todd.
Yep. I'm going to put all three in the chat.
Okay, so Laura, I intend to step up my presence on social media. Yay! Katie D says rewriting and visualizing her business plan. Wonderful. Jerry, adding visualizations to PowerPoint because I've been 100% text. Wow, how important. Yay. And Todd, he just is adding insight. What did I learn? Action. What am I going to do? And outcome. What will the result be? Awesome. So with that, I could just stay here forever because this has been so much fun, but it's already 7:30 and I can't believe the time has flown by so quickly. So I just want to say thank you to everybody because you have been a wonderful audience. I love that you're so engaged, and thank you a million to Elizabeth again for the wonderful collaboration with the New York Public Library. Thank you to our special guest, Todd. Your insights are fantastic. Your book is wonderful. I highly, you know me, you know how much of a bookworm I am, and it's right there on top with so many other great books that I've read. It's really a gem. I highly recommend it, and I highly recommend that all of you get it because you will take away so much from his book. It's a combination of, as you know, expert tips and tools that you can use, but also he mixes in, of course, stories, humor, and it just makes for a fantastic book. I really can't say enough good things about it.
Thank you, Elaine. I appreciate it. It's always great talking to you because as a fellow bookworm, we love our books. And I have to plug Helena's book. Helena's book just came out on content, and I highly recommend you're picking that up.
Thank you. Thank you. You'll all receive the link to that as well if you would. Please connect with Todd on LinkedIn. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. It'll be a joy to stay in touch. And Todd, any parting words that you want to say?
Well, I'll just leave with the Marcel Proust quote. That's the foundation of it's the end of my TED Talks. I'll end it here, is that the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new lands, but in seeing with new eyes. So hopefully when you leave here tonight, you'll start to see the world with new eyes, and you'll become a more visual leader. So with that, thank you for being here and thank you for everything.
And that is beautiful. Mic drop.